As we were introduced, my name's Jane. If you've got any questions, please feel free to ask as we go along. I think we're quite a small group, so it shouldn't be too untenable to do that. So the reason we're here today is to give you our objective is to provide you with a case study of the security risk process and how Department for Work and Pensions manages that currently. So Stuart's in charge of the clicker, so this could be fun. As you can see there, we're the biggest UK's public service department. We have approximately 75,000 staff. I think, to be perfectly honest, that's increasing at the moment with the dreaded Brexit. I think that's impacting all government departments, so I do think that figure's slightly increased. We pay out to 20 million customers. Claimants, customers are all receiving benefits. We pay out £175 billion every year. That's a huge amount of responsibility. We do take some money in, but it's a very small amount. The potential is that we pay out vast sums of money, £650 million every working day. That, I think, Stuart, is that 35% of the UK's banking activity is down to DWP. So I think I'm just trying to give you this background, really, to just give you a little bit of an understanding of where we're at and what our responsibilities are. We are supported by 15 other agencies, one of which is the Health and Safety Executive. They form part of our group. The department's split into 4 main areas, which is Job Centre Plus, which is for working age, anybody who is of working age and isn't in work. We have teams of people who try and get them into work, and then we also have people who pay them the benefits that they need to survive. We also pay out pensions overseas across the world as well, different UK people who've moved abroad. We have to pay those. We've got people with disabilities that are unable to work, single parents, and we also have what we call child maintenance groups. So if there are families with absent parents, and that's where we do have some form of, we take money in because the absent parents have to pay us and we pass that money over. And that area of the department was brought about to make sure that children weren't in poverty from that perspective. So I think the other thing that I wanted to mention here is that we have probably 900 systems, some of them legacy systems that, dare I say, are quite old and challenging in the very fact that they've been around for such a long time. We have probably 500 main suppliers, but I could almost argue that we could double that with subcontracted suppliers. So that's a challenge for us with regard to supplier assurance, etc., third-party management. So, and amongst those systems, we also have 4 critical national infrastructure systems. We hold the country's biggest, well, it's Europe's biggest database of our citizens. So every citizen in the UK is on that database. So we have a responsibility in the security team to protect that data and that information. So in so doing, we work to, should I have my next slide? Has it come? Okay. DWP Values. So all our staff, all 75,000 plus, work towards these values, which is achieving the best, respecting people, looking outwards and making a difference. And for me, making a difference is such an important part of that because we're influencing people's lives. So security is the area that Stuart is head of Enterprise Security Risk Management, which is one element of the security and resilience team within DWP. The other areas are the Cyber Resilience Centre, Security Policy Team, Security Education and Awareness. That gives you a feel, but the Enterprise Security Risk Management team is key to ensuring that systems areas are risk assessed, and we are responsible for making sure we are safe and secure. So I'm going to hand you over to Stuart now.
Thanks, Jane. I think one of the key differences for me with the Department for Work and Pension, is there anybody here from outside the USA? Who are from where are you from? Canada. There's nobody from Europe or anything? One of the key differences for me here is that we're not a private organisation. We are using public funds. The £175 billion is taxpayers' money. We have a duty of care to spend that correctly and wisely all the time. We can't slip up from a reputational point of view. And I think if you look at those values, some people have no choice to do business with us. They've happened along some misfortune in life, they've lost a job, they've had a bereavement, they have to claim benefit. It's not like a bank where you can switch banks if you're not happy with the service. They have to come to us, they have no choice. We have 22 million people that are dependent on us, and that's why the values are so important. And we've got 4 systems, as Jane says, that form part of the critical national infrastructure. If one of those systems goes down, those people don't get paid. So it's a huge ask, really, that we've got to pay the right people at the right time. Otherwise, we'll have that huge impact on people's lives. We set out on our journey probably about 3 years ago to build a risk-driven approach. We've tried really hard to align what we do to the business objectives, which is what you should do. Whether you're in technology or security, everything should be aligned to the business objectives. Security was disparate functions. There was 3 separate security teams covering, one area covered threat, then there was personnel, there was physical, there was cyber. Weren't working together, weren't joined up. So one of the first things that we did was bring in a chief security officer to bring all these pillars working together. And that's been a huge challenge and still is a huge challenge. We'll move on to culture, but changing culture is harder for me than any tech implementation that we've ever tried to do. What we have got at the moment is 4 strategic, if you like, security risks that are overarching everything, that cover all the work we're doing. Just for your information, these are deliberate denial of availability of our systems and data, unauthorized access, misuse and disclosure of the data, unauthorized manipulation of the data, and then we've got a physical one around harm to staff and contractors and such like in our organisation. Where we were, it's on a bit of a go slow as this click, there we go. Where we were on a, you've probably all had this in your organisations, that security is seen as the bad guys. They're the security, the blockers. Security says, no, you can't do this, you can't do that. Security says you can't. We had something called security accreditation. Anybody familiar with accreditation from a security perspective? Yeah. Everybody familiar with ISO 27001? There's 114 controls in ISO 27001, and basically accreditation was a tick box exercise against all applicable controls in 27001 to say whether when something was going live, whether they'd met those controls or not. And if one hadn't been met, they wouldn't go live. And there was no risk lens put on that whatsoever. It was simple no or yes, which doesn't meet the business objectives. There might be entirely good reasons why you don't need to put a control in place. You might be able to accept the risk, but there was no risk lens given to it whatsoever. We'd outsourced our risk management function in DWP, and we took it back in about 3 years ago. The slight problem with that is that we took it back in and we had no risks, we had no capability, we had no team, we had no framework. So the team that I run has been built up from scratch. It consists of security architects, security risk practitioners, and over the course more of the last 18 months, we've used the OSEG website, and all the team are now certified GRC professionals, as well as a number of certified GRC auditors as well. So it's been a huge jump from a technology-driven security process to a risk-driven security process. There was a huge focus on fixing vulnerabilities. You don't have to fix a vulnerability. You can accept the risk if it's an entirely correct decision to do so. Simple things like the cost of a control might outweigh the cost of the loss. That was never considered. We've got recent examples where controls were costing in excess of £5 million per annum. But because we've moved to a risk process, it allows informed decision-making to be taken to accept those risks, thus saving money. And if I go back to my values, providing value for money, etc., to the British taxpayer. Moving on to the next slide. Or going back to the next slide.
Oh.
It's coming eventually here. Just 1 minute. Just going to test my talking skills here, is this. Some.
All right. Oh,
There.
there you go.
Whoa. It wasn't really worth waiting for, was it? It's not, you know, you were expecting something earth-shattering there, and you've got a risk matrix. Sorry about that. Is anybody familiar with that? You can assess 5 by 5, you can assess 3 by 3. We chose the 5 by 5 model. What we've found.
I have a question.
Go for it.
Since you start with a lot of controls without any resource perspective, why is the decision, if the level of maturity was really basic, why you decide to go to 5 by 5 and not 3 by 3?
This is for security risk. The DWP has a separate overarching risk management function that looks at operational risk, financial risk. They already used the 5 by 5, and we conformed with that. Now, we moved to asset-based. We started off on asset-based risk assessment. It's a standard process. ISO 27005, which we used, allows us to do that. The slight problem with that is we wasn't sure what all our assets were. At this point in time, we've got around 2,500 risks, managed security risks. What we've realized is it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable. We're getting repeated risks. There's repeated control failings. We need to change our model. We didn't know enough 2.5 years ago because we weren't mature enough. If you look at your 5 levels of security maturity, we'd have probably been lower than the lowest marking on the security maturity. Today, we're probably between managed and defined. So we know enough now to know that we need to change our process. Go for it.
So, do you have any data security statutes or regulations that you needed to follow?
Well, we're bound by GDPR now. Sorry, I can't see you for that light.
Anything besides GDPR? Is there anything?
Not really. Well, there was the predecessor to GDPR. GDPR firmed up the data protection laws that have been in place for a long time. But now, obviously, we're bound by GDPR. And one of the things that GDPR brought in was to mandate a data protection officer for all major companies in the UK. So the department does have a data protection officer who's in the same team as us to keep us on the straight and narrow. So we have that major law. Hi. I'm not waving at you. I'm just trying to block that light out. Sorry.
So my question is around assessing the likelihood. How do you do that?
With a great amount of subjectivity.
Exactly.
So this is one of the reasons this is one of the reasons I want to move away from this. I want to move to controls assessment because We have some very high definitions around has it happened before? Is there more than an 80% chance of this occurring? Is there more than a 60% chance of this occurring? It's subject. It's down to subjectivity. And on a 5 by 5, I could say it's a 3, you could say it's a 4, somebody else could say it's a 5, and none of us are wrong. And what I want to do, and what we are going to do, is to move to controls assurance, which will be based on system criticality and how critical is that system in achieving the business objectives of the department, i.e. paying customers benefit or getting them into work. And there will be some defining criteria. Is it internet facing? Is it holding PII? Is it involved in the payment process?
That's the way that I look at third party, right? Your first lens is criticality or reliance
Yep.
on whatever. And then your lens basically, your next lens is exposure to certain types.
Yep.
And so in talking with CROs, they're very, very fond of this matrix which says, the physical equation is impact times likelihood equals exposure. But that's like almost impossible to do in the real world because you don't have the data set.
I agree. Yeah, I completely agree. And
I get stuck with trying to marry those things back up again because discussions I've had with CROs, there's a bit of a disconnect with it that you say we're going to control the valuation against criticality and actual exposure, but that doesn't take into account likelihood because I don't think it can do that well.
I'm not convinced under the new methodology that we need to take likelihood into account.
That's what I'm thinking. Thank you for saying that. I haven't realized that.
Yeah. No. I should have brought some glasses here, actually. I don't. We will then have a control set, whether it's NIST, whether it's ISO, whatever it is. We will have certain controls, Cloud Alliance, and there will be a pro forma. Is your system this? Is it exposed to the internet? And that will dictate a set of controls that should be apportioned to that system or process. That is where we are going. It's very, very early stages, but that removes all subjectivity. And we'll have policies, we'll have standards, and hopefully it will all link together. And we've got 2,600 risks at the moment. We're getting lost in the detail. We're not focusing on the right thing. If we can look at the control failings, we can see across the piece where we need to put protective monitoring in, where we need to look at our privileged users. And if we can get those big controls in and get them meeting their objectives, then risks will start to come down and we won't get bogged down in the minutiae of all the 2,600. We care about the big risks that impact our business objectives, not the little things that probably affect a catering contract somewhere. It's the things that hit our business objectives. So
we find that a lot of risk owners are focusing on the colour of the risk rather than the control they need to put in place to fix it, and that's where we're hoping this change in our strategy will.
There was one other big thing I'll mention. Risk owners. Now, this has been a problem for me, and this is what I was just going to touch on. Because one of the things for me is that risks aren't owned in the right place. So a lot of risks have been owned. If there's a system risk, it tended to be owned by technology, which to me is wrong. Because if there is a payment system, and that system is breached and we can't pay people, it will not be technology that's impacted. It will be the front line, first line business operations that can't pay their customers. And what's happened is that the risk owner was the same person charged with the remediation. Nobody was holding them to account, and those that were most impacted by the risks didn't have the visibility of the risk. So there was a conflict. They own the risk and responsible for the remediation with nobody holding them to account. So again, that's something we've had to address and move across so that those most impacted had full sight, full visibility of what it was that could affect their business. Accountability was an issue. If somebody benefits from accepting a risk, it's been very difficult to articulate to them that they're equally accountable should that risk be exploited as well. Accountability has been a challenge. Jane, I'll pass back to you.
Okay. So I think in part of doing all of this, I am head of the GRC program for DWP. So part of my role is to embed this culture of GRC across the department, specifically around the security ask. And I'll be honest with you, it sometimes feels like boiling the ocean because we've got such a vast organisation, and I'm talking to senior managers, and we're back to that accountability. So can I ask, does anyone have issues with accountability in their organisation? Do your risk owners, your people understand their roles around accountability?
So we have similar, I also represent a public entity, like a state government, not the federal, but that's how it typically starts. But what we have done that, although they own their objectives and mission for their department, so whatever supports that objective becomes theirs. So the data is there, system is there, and they are ultimately accountable to reduce the risk, even if it's IT risk. So that needs to be, that's what we did. We established that ownership upfront. And so that's still not 100% there, but we are getting there.
Okay, thank you. So I think one of the challenges I found is that I head up the GRC team, and probably frustratingly, I should never have called ourselves the GRC team, because especially senior management see that, oh yeah, GRC, oh yeah, we all get that, but Jane does that. And that's not obviously what it's about. We all need to be involved, and there has to be that integration across all the teams. But it's very much, oh yeah, Jane's team do that, it's fine. And this is a challenge now I'm now facing. So I presume you're all familiar with OSEG, the Open Compliance and Ethics Group, and you know, they talk about principled performance. And if I'm honest, I don't think they get it. I'm not sure they fully understand it. Some do, but there's some challenges along the way. So can you move on to the next?
Have we done the OSEG one?
Yeah, I've done that one.
Sorry, there you go.
So one of the challenges is, you know, these are the four main areas that I'm working on, or my team are working on, is, you know, that it's vitally important, it's the collaboration. I need to get all areas, large and small, to talk to each other, understand the impacts they have on other areas, make sure that information is passed across, that we understand it, the processes and the data are correct, accurate, the integrity is there. And that's a culture shift. We feel a lot of areas, they're still working in silos, and there's not that collaboration across the piece. So these are the areas, and back to accountability, you know, some areas they're absolutely fine, they understand it, but there is still an awful lot to do in this area. We're back to that, we've got a huge digital presence in the department. There's a lot of innovation going on, lots of new technology. But at the end of the day, they're not impacted if something goes wrong. And that's the challenge for us, to ensure that, you know, different leaders across the department understand that if a control isn't in place on a system, it's them that will be impacted, not technology. They'll fix it, or they're responsible for adding the control, but if it's not there or it's on the list to do, they're not too worried because they'll get to it eventually. That's not good enough. I need our business leads to be pushing the technology teams to get it done and to make sure they understand why they need it now. So there's lots of work to go on there. That it's around the ethics of it, making sure that people understand their roles, their obligations. Hi.
I have a question. On your model, why did you not put controls on your framework? To me, this is like a framework for thinking about your design. Right? Because you have that's what I think this is.
Yeah, well, I suppose, I don't think it was a conscious decision not to put controls. We kind of felt that they were a part of it all. So the processes and data is part of your control, should be part of that process. But it's a good point, and maybe we need to perhaps focus that a little bit more when we're talking to people, so thank you.
Next.
Yeah. So kind of one of the things that I came up with is that maybe I'll stop banging on about GRC, and maybe I'll just try and focus attention in certain areas, and as a result, they'll be doing GRC by default. So it's very much around, you know, that collective understanding, integration, desired behaviours. If I can get them working to the documented lines of defence so that they're clear and that there's clear roles and responsibilities, and not just in our team, but not just security and resilience, but across the department. And if I can get that moving, I can again get that the shared data model, and we can agree the team's remits and their outputs. And if I can get all these things to flow, they'll be kind of doing it without realizing it. But I'll be honest, I feel we're a long way from there yet. But that's kind of where I'm going with this at the moment, is to try and do that shift to make these things happen in a different way. Because at the moment, as I've said earlier, GRC is seen as me and my team rather than a collective program.
Next.
So I think, yeah, okay. So what I'm trying to do, I don't recognise that slide. I think we've jumped. Yeah.
Okay. I'm
I
not very
said
good
he
at
was
this.
in
Not very
charge
good at
of the
this.
clicker.
I've only got to press one simple button and I can't even do that.
So I think, where are we? Okay, so I think for me, the vitals for success, I've kind of listed a few of them there, but the bottom line is the key message for me. It's that we're seen as an enabler, we're seen to be helping the business, and we're not stopping them from doing anything. But we need to go through these steps to help this happen. And I think the challenge can't be underestimated here. I don't know if you wanted to add anything on those, Stuart, really. It's just a kind of, the security champions is something that I'm keen to develop, that we've got people across all areas that understand.
What I would say is the problem we had was the lack of maturity and also the capability. If you look at the metrics, there's something like 1.5 million global shortfall of security professionals at the moment. We didn't have security expertise in the first line of defence. That's been a huge problem for us, and we didn't have the risk expertise in the first line of defence. So we've had a kind of a hybrid model, really, which is wrong, in that my own team have been assessing the risks and been assuring them, which is completely wrong. It borders you can't mark your own homework, but the capability didn't exist. Now it's gradually coming into the first line of defence, and that's helping to change the culture. They're taking the responsibility and they're taking the accountability. We're hoping to get the culture change from the top as well. We're trying, hopefully, to get a risk appetite. That might help. Yes?
I think that's definitely a great observation with focusing on pushing that into the first line of defense as they own the risk, honestly. But how were you able to change that mentality from top down? Is that something that was regulatory?
What was that last statement? Sorry, I didn't quite catch it.
Top down.
Regulatory enforced, or is it just something that you were recognition?
No, it wasn't. Nothing regulatory enforced at all. This is, without any shadow of a doubt, getting the culture change and the buy-in from the top is our biggest challenge. What I'm pleased about now for the first time is they're talking about risk. What I found is if I went with my 2,500 risks to the board, it meant nothing, absolutely nothing. But if I go and say, your controls fail and your privileged users can access this, they kind of get that. If I say the firewalls aren't configured correctly, they get that, which is why we've got to move to this controls thing. And just while I think on, I'm going to come back to likelihood for 1 minute. Sorry, I'm going off at a tangent now. One of the reasons that I think likelihood we should move away from it is if And it's a great example. If you go back to your offices and assess the risk of your office burning down, the likelihood would be really low. But you've all got fire extinguishers. You've all got the controls in place. And that's just a basic one for me that makes me realise that sometimes let's look at the controls and get the controls in place rather than look at the likelihood. And then you cut out all your debates, because what we've found is people don't like bad news. And that's part of the culture from the top. We've got to get the culture so people can surface the bad news, surface the risks, and they don't like to surface the bad risks. If we can change that, because they need to realise that not every single risk can be mitigated, but every single risk can be managed. And again, if we can get the board, and we're doing all sorts of things from regular sessions with them, surveys, security education and awareness, we're bringing in strategies. If we can get that, the culture of it's okay, guys, to tell us if something's not good, then we know it's not good and we could do something about it. It's about doing the due diligence. If we do our due diligence as risk professionals, we can't be held to account. My own function was part of technology. It didn't work. We were too busy getting drawn into the delivery. We had to stand. We've come out of technology. And there's been significant breaches, both here in America and in the UK, where one of the first lessons learned after the data breach was to move your security function out of technology, to bring them independent. And little things like that are starting to change the culture. We're a long way from it, but we're getting there. Sorry, Jane.
No.
Bizarrely, we put report to finance, which is better. Which is better. Yeah.
So I think just to reinforce that we are looking for that buy-in from the top, but also to sort of help with that. It's about a bottom-up approach as well, and we've got to find the balance that we've got leadership from the top, that they are setting the example, that they are brought into what we're trying to do. But I think also, by the very nature, we focus on negatives, and we need to look at some of the strengths we have in order to be a little bit more positive, so that it becomes a shared approach rather than just a dictatorial, this is what you must do, etc., etc. So I think the other thing I wanted to mention, and it's a bit controversial, but I put their process and culture before technology. Now, if I'm totally honest, that's not where we are, because we bought our software solution, and if I'm totally open and honest, we bought it too early because we weren't ready. So we're probably, I'm saying that's important because we didn't do it, and I know from experience that we did it the wrong way around. You know, everybody says your GRC journey is 3 to 5 years. I couldn't agree more. We're still very much on our journey, yet we've had our software solution for 2.5 years.
I think even in security, there's education for our colleagues. Just an anecdote, there was a discussion only last week about the blocking of using your work email to register for external sites, such as Ticketmaster and the big ticket agencies and such like. And my question was, what's the risk? Now, there will be a risk. There'll be a risk of increased risk of phishing or something like that, and things like that. But is it a big enough risk to dictate such a draconian control of blocking access to all those websites? I don't think so, personally, but that's what it shows, that the risk, even in security, we've still got work to do for the risk to drive the policy.
Yeah.
Still certain siloed working.
So, and I think that's where part of my role is to engage more with the policy team, to understand, you know, looking at, like, for our acceptable use policy, is it fit for purpose? Does it do what we need it to do at the right level? And, you know, they have, I can't remember what it's called, but they have like an exceptions team that meets regularly for people who request not to have to comply with the policy. Well, that's time, money and effort every month that if the policy was right in the first place, would we need to spend all that time and effort on those forums? So I think, for me, we're still very much on our journey. And I just just for my own information, is there anybody, we purchased 4 modules. We've got IT risk that we've currently using, and we're just starting with IT compliance. And Mike over here is our project manager, so he's living and breathing it. So,
Sorry, can I? Mike's obviously done something bad in a past life, because he's led this project for the last 3 years. Is there anything you want? We've got a couple of minutes, Mike. Is there anything you wanted to say?
Well, just probably that I think our initial challenges. Our initial challenges were around the capability, certainly with processes and procedures, and it comes back to what's on the slide here, that if we did it the other way around and matured our processes and procedures and then looked at the software, but we bought the software first and then started to mature procedures. The actual expertise that we had at the time, we didn't have the expertise, so we employed a transition partner and actually quite quickly found out that they didn't have much more expertise than what we had. So that was a real lesson learned for us. And then as we start to build up the onboarding of the risks onto the tool, we've had further challenges there. It's been mentioned here around First Line. First Line didn't have mature risks, so further work had to be undertaken on that. So we've had constant lessons learned going on all of the time, and having that accountability within First Line now and responsibility is proving a challenge. So the adoption and the culture is proving to be a challenge for ourselves, but it's something that we are overcoming, we're escalating where necessary, and more risks are onboarded, are being updated, but it's still a massive challenge. As was mentioned there, that we're almost 3 years into it now. It's a 3 to 5 year implementation, and it does take 5 years. It's certainly going from Excel spreadsheets, Word documents, PowerPoint to a software solution is a really massive challenge that can't be underestimated.
thank you, Mike. I'm conscious of time here, but that's just a list of how we will measure the success for the department. And I think if we can get those things right, we will be delivering a department that is as safe and secure as it can be for our UK citizens. May I just ask one quick question for any of the MetricStream users in the room? Is anybody using the UCF, the Unified Compliance Framework? No. Okay, well, let's pick some brains.
I'm conscious us two here are probably keeping you from your lunch now. It's about 12 o'clock, 12:05. Yes?
Have you used what were the tactics you used to define the line of defense, since you sound to have multiple groups within Do you write it down? Do you illustrate it?
We just use the industry standard models for lines of defense and tried to change the wording to fit our business. So for example, technology actually we class as the first line of defense. Technology, HR, finance, policy, they're all operations, they're all in the first line. Security, the wider risk management group, they sit in the second line. And then we've got our internal audit colleagues who bizarrely have just audited us as well, the process in the third line. But it was making it real. It was taking that industry definition and making it real that if somebody, they're responsible in first line for identifying, owning, managing and assessing that risk. And what we had a lot of was risk ignorance, which actually is risk acceptance. And people thought it was okay not to know about stuff. We've had to try and educate that as well. So it was just taking the industry model, putting our own wording around it in a simple, easy business-focused language. We're getting there slowly.
Thank you.
Okay, any more questions before we wrap this and you can all enjoy your lunch? Thank you very much for listening. Cheers. Have a good rest of the day.